I'd like to call this meeting to order at 9 a.m. The Board of Commissioners on October 18th. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a motion to approve the minutes of October 11th. So moved. Second, all those in favor, say aye. 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 Ms. Merritt, please join us.
Thank you for having me. I am here to provide just a general update. I'm going to actually focus today on community service. I do have some information in your handout about juvenile and adult services as well, but primarily we're just going to roll through community service department initially. Since I seem to be here more often, I'd like to provide more information about some of our other programs. So as you know, our community service department, we operate with both out of custody and in custody clients. We get our in custody from the jail. We provide various services in the community for garbage removal. We assist in maintaining the parks. We do dump stoppers program through BLM. We maintain one of BLM's Upper Mill Creek parks adjacent to ours. And we do noxious weed disposal as well through BLM. We do a variety of other county maintenance as well with some of our buildings, doing the landscaping like at the Academy building. We used to do our grounds here. However, since your revamp is very much better maintained with your current contract. So that's just a general overview of our community service department. We have four full-time FTE assigned to that program. One is the community service supervisor, and then we actually have 3 FTE with work crew work crew leaders. We have had 1 vacant work crew leader for approximately, we're actually going on a year. We've recruited for that position a number of times to no avail. And unfortunately, we are just kind of waiting, and then we'll repost it and see what we get. We have had an opportunity to hire some on-call part-time folks that were very, of course, short-lived because they did have other jobs that took them away from it. So we always try and get some additional weekend help because primarily that's when our clients usually are more apt to report for community service. We do allow the clients, if their court order allows it, to buy out their hours instead of actually working. So last year, I believe that we brought in up approximately $104,000 in buyout hours. So far this year, we're at about $30,000. So that is the revenue generating for us as well. Individuals that we have on adult supervision who we provide subsidy for. So that's either us giving them a housing stipend or assisting them with treatment services. We do bill that back to the client. We do give them the opportunity to work those funds off through community service. So we've actually had some good luck with having folks actually report and clear their fee accounts while also providing service back to the community. So any questions just generally on the overall program?
Yeah, so what's the impact for having 1 vacant work crew leader for the last year? What's the impact of the department for that?
So if you want to turn the page, you have a graph that actually shows that. I know I like visuals, and I know you do as well. So this is overall our community service hours. The blue is the hours worked. The orange is the buyouts. The gray is inmate hours, which is actually our inmate work crew through the jail. And then the green line is the total hours ordered through the court. As you can see in the Q4, that's when the true impact of COVID hit with that dive with the hours ordered. Surprisingly, as you can see that quarter, our actual hours were dropped drastically. The inmate hours disappeared. These inmate hours actually did not come back until just recently. And with COVID, we did close down the program for approximately 2.5 months for precautions. And then we limited the number of folks that we actually would take for safety precautions in the vehicles. So what you can find is at that, the quarter two of 21-22 is where we actually lost that additional FTE. We lost that position. So we have continued to obviously decrease in some of the services that we've been providing at that point. And that can also be seen on the next graph on the next page, as far as the services that we were providing through our contracts through ODOT and BLM. But for the most part, we have continued to decline. The hours ordered has continued to decline. A lot of that is residual from COVID if they're not being ordered. Our buyout hours are continuing because folks are still being held accountable to that. So in what we're finding is that folks are just more apt to buy out than take the time to come and actually work the hours, which I think is parallel to what we're finding in the workforce as well. So in quarter four also, we do pre-COVID, we did provide a work crew for juvenile as well. But once the true impact of COVID happened, we discontinued the juvenile crews. And unfortunately, because of the additional loss of FTE, we have not been able to increase that back, to bring that back on. So those juvenile folks who have community service ordered, they're actually finding a nonprofit within the community that is approved through their juvenile probation officer. And they're being able to actually work that in the community, just not through our crew, with our crew leader.
Do adults have that option too, to work outside the crews for nonprofit?
They do. When somebody is ordered for community service, the immediate number one step is the crew. However, if there's geographical restrictions, transportation restrictions, medical, that they can't do that, then we do work with them and we find either a local nonprofit that we can verify the hours, or we have them find it and we just make contact with that nonprofit so that we have that verification for the court that we've approved those hours. So we do work with them on that as well. So the next slide that you have, or graph, excuse me, is basically our state and federal work performance contracts. As you can see, the quarter four of 1920 is the true impact of COVID. And so we dropped quite a bit. We were able to increase back up. As you can see, quarter two of 2021, our ODOT days was at our highest. Primarily that is being done by our crew leaders. Our housing, our folks who are actually living in our housing that we subsidize are required to do 1 day of community service a week. And so that has really been our bread and butter in order to get some of these jobs. And we get, unfortunately, with our ODOT contracts, we do get contacted quite a bit as far as the litter that's on the side of the road, and that is something that is seen, and we're not apt to allow that to continue. So that actually is a priority for us, is to make sure that our streets are safe and that garbage is removed. And unfortunately, in some areas, it's right back very quickly. So we're usually on those jobs more often. As you can see in the quarter two of 21-22, that is our loss of the work crew leader. And as you can see, our work on the weeds actually stops because unfortunately we don't have that third person in order to go up and do the various jobs. Our focus has been on the parks, as well as ODOT, and when we get reference for dump stoppers program, instead of us being up in the woods looking for weeds, which is where we usually find the dump sites that then we go and clean up, we're relying on the woods deputy through the sheriff's office or BLM to notify us of dump sites so that we can go clean those up instead of us being up there already doing weeds and finding them. So, and really that third person makes a big deal. And in addition, we also had the ice storm that we all kind of had impact on with the parks. And so our focus was also trying to clean up the parks and get that safe for the community once we were able to open that back up. Because there was quite a bit of damage in a lot of the parks that we were working very closely with Matt and trying to really prioritize those areas so that they were safe for our community. So overall, our dump stoppers program, I really highlighted in this, overall we have removed almost 56,000 pounds of trash out of our community and out of our forests. And that would include 5 trailers and vehicles, over 77 furniture items, over 20 appliances, and over 200 tires. So those are either reported to us on one of our highways, side of the roads, that we're able to actually go and help pick up that trash, or it's actually up in the forest where we're notified by BLM or the woods deputy that there's an issue.
So before you move from that thing, so you've indicated in statistics a decrease in ordered community service, and then also re-entered that in a court-ordered hours have continued to dwindle. And you show a graph of some of the work, including roadside cleanup. Every single program that you're working on is going downhill. Now, I'm confident, so that we have the court-ordered element here that I want to ask about, but also want to make certain that we're clear for the record that how much of this graph about trash removed and ODOT days and weeds, et cetera, has to do with available funding so for example, our BLM funding, our Title II funding, does that play a role in any of this graph?
No, this is primarily the available community service
Just people.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's a supervisory employee or it's the actual adults in custody.
Yes.
Yeah, it's people.
It's people. Because the other issue too is when we have the inmate crew, we get a lot of work done because that's a dedicated person or multiple people that we know that we can grab them. I hate to say it this way, but they are confined. We know we can go pick them up. They're coming out. We can guarantee we have 1 to 2 people every day. And having just that extra set of hands, we get so much more done. And in addition to not being able to have an inmate work crew, we don't have the extra FTE in order to sustain that inmate work crew because we had one person focused on the inmate crew that we would focus on certain jobs. Now we're basically, we're doing what we can just to get by, which we don't find, we're not comfortable with, but that's all we can do with the workforce that we have, whether that's employee or that's community service workers or inmate workers. So we have a variety of things. There's a lot that this program does in our community, whether it's dump stoppers, weeds, noxious weed removal, taking care of the parks, picking up the garbage, or previously, pre-COVID, we were helping with event setup and takedown for commerce things locally. We have a contract with City of Independence where we would help with their beautification, entry into the city. We would help with Indie Days. We would help with setup for 4th of July. We would help with a variety of community events because we had the workforce that was able to do that. And in any type of event, there's additional work that folks don't really think of. They just think of showing up and doing the event, but there's a lot of setup and takedown and clean. And that's stuff that we always would help with. And unfortunately, because we don't have the community service workers and we are down in FTE, we are having to cut back on what we focus on, which at this point we're focusing on the parks. We've just recently closed the parks, so now we're able to focus back on ODOT and BLM and our noxious weeds contracts to be sure that we're meeting our requirements of those contracts and agreements. And they are very understanding. I want to make that very clear, is that we're very transparent with them that we don't have the people, and we are affected because of we're down in FTE and we don't have the workers. And they're very understanding of that, and we're doing the best we can with that. But unfortunately, it is impacting our community. So I'm noticing more of the garbage on the side of the roads. We just can't get to it quickly enough, but we're getting there. So
Are you worried about any of the remaining contracts, sustaining those with current trends, or?
no, with our noxious weeds contracts, we only got partial, I want to say partial funding for that. It wasn't what we asked for through the Title II. And we only have approximately 3 days left of that. And normally we focus on that at this time of the year anyway, because we don't want to be up there during fire season. And so we usually focus on that about this time of the year. And so I think that our focus is to finish out that contract. So that's one less thing we need to worry about with our reduced staffing and with our reduced workers. And then that way we can refocus on the amount of garbage that is being left on the side of the roads or the dump sites, because we are seeing more of those and some of those that we just can't get to. So, but obviously we want to continue that work, the weeds work. So if there's funding available, we want to continue to apply for that. But a good measure is, can we sustain that? Is it appropriate for us to do that with the workforce that we have? And again, what's the impact on the community and our environment? Because those noxious weeds are not something that we want in the forest, because that, hurts the overall ecosystem, basically.
So I'm gonna ask this again, I'm sure towards the end, right? But again, I see a trend line here. It's pretty dramatic and serious. But without throwing the bench under the bus, again, I see court orders. You're indicating court orders are part of our challenge here. And that, we're just not getting as many people into community service as we used to. Those numbers are evident here. Do you see a change in that? Again, I think we've ridden the COVID wave long enough now. Is there any likelihood that we're going to see, from your perspective, to see any changes in those numbers? It's not for a lack of folks that are being arrested or charged.
Well, there's many steps through that process, right? I think that we know that. Once individuals are arrested, case needs to be filed, and then it needs to be prosecuted in the court, and then convicted or disposition. So there's a variety of steps in there that are challenges. So if somebody is arrested, but yet the case isn't filed with the court, then there's a challenge there. So, or if it gets through the court and community service is not ordered, which it is ordered, we're not seeing any change in what is coming out of the court system as far as normal sentencing practices. If you do notice on your community service hours, so Q2 of 1920 and Q3 of 1920, there was a sentencing practice change in there, in which I believe that there was a change in how they were sentencing DUI diversion folks to community service, because the law says 3 days jail or 40 hours of community service. And so of our folks, if you have a DUI, that you're arrested, so there's your 3 days jail. So in some instances, they, depending on where that ran, we would have more community service if they weren't actually arrested. And so there was a little bit of a practice change there, which is absolutely understandable. But then you see COVID, you see us bump back up, and then we're slowly going back down. But I think in all of our systems right now, we are all facing staffing challenges. The criminal aspects based off of the arrest, I don't believe is changing. I think that in some aspects we are seeing more egregious crime. So crime is happening. It's just whether or not we can get it prosecuted and whether or not it's getting to the court. So I think that there's multiple steps in there. that impact whether or not we're getting the orders of sentencing. So, and I think that in some aspects here, the wave in that is them cleaning up some of that COVID related stuff, and maybe it's just leveling back off. The law changes with Measure 110 has a huge impact on that. So you don't have those PCS crimes that are going through, and that was quite a bit. Overall, the adult supervision is down 26%. And you can say that that's an effect of Measure 110. You can say that's an effect of COVID and really kind of a squeezing of the criminal justice system, staffing issues. There's so many things that you can really point to that may have an impact on it. And there's not one that we can specifically say that's the problem. So, but Measure 110 is clear impact. I know that that's been a discussion many times throughout multiple meetings, but that is an impact overall on the number of cases going through the system as well.
Are people with possession charges better candidates for community service in any way, or is that part of it, just the type?
I don't know that I would say that they're better candidates, but that's also a very large number of, that was probably about 80 to 90 cases for us, which is quite a bit. And so if each of them have 40 hours of community service, well, now I don't have that. And it's not being prosecuted. So that reduces my pool of workers. So, and most of those folks were more on the front end, first time, and some of them, maybe it's the second time they had a possession charge or it was attached with something else. And so they're more apt to, hey, I don't like this and I want out. And so they would just get their stuff done and then we would move them on to better things. But so, I mean, there's a multitude of factors as to why this is what we're seeing. So that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
So I do have on here upcoming legislation. I know that there is on the ballot, there is a constitution change that is up for voters. There is the question as to whether or not that may impact community service further. Based off of the language change with that changes, that pulls out that slavery and involuntary servitude, they did add in language regarding court, probation, parole, being able to utilize community service treatment and other interventions as part of the rehabilitation, reparation, and giving back to the community. So that language is still in there for adults, and that's for probation standpoint. A concern that has been brought forward as far as our juvenile association is that this specifically talks about adult. So our kiddos who are adjudicated also are provided with community service, or if they go through our sanctioned court diversion programs, we do ask them to do community service as a way to provide reparation back for their inappropriate activity or action. And so this could potentially impact youth being required to do some type of community service as a probation or sanctioned court or diversion program. So there's the potential there that it could impact us. But overall, from a probation standpoint, the language that is in this measure is supported through the Association of Community Corrections Directors. So we do see this coming. That's the potential impact. I know that there's a question as far as how that may impact inmate crews and the prison population. Unsure. It does specifically speak to Section 41 of the Oregon Constitution that identifies, in 2014, the voters identified that we want anyone incarcerated in prisons to either be full-time work or schooling, some type of service, so that they're better prepared once they're released. It does say that this does not repeal that section, but not sure how that may impact them further. There's always that potential for challenge in courts or whatnot. But from our standpoint, there may be an issue with the inmate crew. We just don't know. So, but that's the only thing that we see coming forward right now. And that may change very shortly, but right now that's the one thing that is a topic for our legislative committee through our associations, both adult and juvenile.
That's very helpful for people listening and debating whether or not how they will vote for ballot measure. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I will also say that in that constitutional amendment language, it does not prohibit the legislature from adding additional legislation requiring us to pay people who are incarcerated or being used in community service. And I anticipate that's the other shoe that will drop. And there's plenty of language going on through task force work right now. Make certain that people who are held in custody are paid an equal wage for the work they do, equivalent to state minimum standards. So that's coming potentially in this, and none of that language is in any of this.
No, it's not. And I do know, I mean, there's been reference to other states who have done very similar changes to their constitution to eliminate those words, that derogatory language words, get it out of there. So there's been a multitude of lawsuits around that have gotten clear up to appeals. Colorado, I think, is one that the Oregon Department of Corrections has referenced in a lot of their language to the legislature in regards to this change. That actually was shot down by the appeals court in Colorado. And I think that their language was even more vague than ours. As that wasn't an intention, but that doesn't mean that could not happen here. I mean, there's a multitude of possibilities that could happen, and we truly don't know what the impact is or what the legislature could do on the backside of that. There's no guarantee that we know one way or the other how it will play out until we're on the back end. So there's good intentions that somehow have, negative impacts that are unanticipated. So
Commissioner Pope's point, potential that we may face having to pay folks a wage. You mentioned that some folks pay off fee accounts for housing and things like that. What do we credit them per hour of work currently?
Currently, we are at our fee schedule identifies $12 an hour.
Okay.
And that was where we've been trying to keep it consistent with minimum, but minimum has changed. And so our fee schedule hasn't come up again, but we're trying to keep it consistent with minimum, if not lower. I think for years, for a long time, it was at $10 an hour. And then we just actually bumped it to 12. Personally, I'd like to keep it on the lower end, so it is more feasible for folks to actually be able to pay that off in a reasonable time frame, or go and do the community service because they get that done way faster. I mean, an 8-hour day of community service is less impactful than trying to come up with,
So the 12 is the buyout.
$12 an hour.
What is the actual credit for the hour worked?
$12 an hour.
Same. Okay.
Yeah, it's the same.
Okay, that's helpful.
I think that might have been a structural member of the building that just popped.
Are you
I've been in a
suggesting
building like
we
that
run?
before.
So that is our community service program in a nutshell. Any questions or any additional questions around that I can try and answer?
So I think if we aren't able to obligate our duty to tend to noxious weeds and garbage, we should probably find a way to supplement that. We want to, obviously 100% of that would be great with community service workers, but it's still a duty of the county to take care of that. So we talk about that if needed.
Yeah, well, the noxious weed is actually grant funded through the government. So, and absolutely, we would love to continue to do that. Our issue is the staffing.
Exactly.
And so we just need to be sure, we need to try and fill that position. And then also the workers, that's helpful as well. We don't want to send just my crew leader up there to pull weeds or, cut back blackberries. You can get so much more done, like I said, with more hands. Just even one more set of hands makes a big difference. And then again, you know, that inmate work crew out of the jail, just having that dedicated person or two people, it is extremely impactful for us in the amount of work that we can actually do.
And that's mostly ODOT projects for inmate work crew.
For the inmate work crew, we usually try and put them on the bigger stuff, the dump stoppers and the weeds. The ODOT we try and do with as many people as we have, so we focus that really on the weekends, because that's where a majority of our folks show up. And usually that's our housing folks. It's usually Saturday. So Friday and Saturday are our big days. And so we try and focus them more on the garbage removal on the highways than we do up in pulling weeds or dump stoppers. So
you're not working on county roads?
we do work on some county roads. Yeah. So ODOT's structure is kind of odd in how their areas overlap. So we have part of Polk County, part of Yamhill County, and with our inmate work crews, we don't go out of county with them. And so then there's a lower half of Polk County that goes into Benton County, and prisons have some of those contracts that we are actually continually trying to get back, because we feel that we can tackle it sooner. We're here, we see it, we can get it done quicker than some of the prison, because they have so many, they're having the same issues too, that they weren't able to get their crews out for quite some time. And so they're now just getting back out. But some of our roads we would like to have, just so that we can go get it done. Because there's been other conversations with prior commissioners about some of the highways that have a multitude of garbage on it, but it's not our contract, it's not our road. And so technically we shouldn't be out there, because then there's contractual issues around that. But we want to get it picked up. We don't want it out there. So we keep trying, but we also have a challenge too with stuff. We take on more rows. So yeah. Okay.
Thanks so much. Any further questions?
Okay. So just briefly, I just have some more. I'm just going to go through it real quickly. I just have some graphs for you as far as our juvenile. Our total youth supervised is continuing to fluctuate. I actually received this morning our stats for September for our youth supervised. So that went from 104 up to 114 as of September. And our referrals and case assignments, you see that big referral jump in July and August. We don't have a true idea as to why that is. Again, that's in July and August. That's preschool. We're not sure. We had an in-depth conversation trying to rack our brains as to what could have possibly happened in order for in July to have this sudden spike of referrals. And we quite frankly just don't have an answer. So majority of we try to defer a majority of our referrals to our lower level of intervention, either our formal accountability agreements or our sanction court, depending on the level of the crime, the activity will determine whether or not it is filed with the court. But the juvenile system's primary focus is to divert them from further involvement or depth into the criminal justice system. And so we really try and divert them and give them treatment, skills, intervention on the front end before they get any deeper into the system with an actual court filing. So, and then that third graph just shows our disposition status, which just reinforces what I was just saying. It actually identifies, as you can see, that our sanction court, which our sanction court numbers are the highest, and then our formal accountability agreements, which is the FAA on that table below. So, and that is in a calendar year, not a fiscal year, so it's a little different in how we look at that. So we are seeing with school in session, we are seeing quite a We are seeing more of our kiddos. We're busy. They are busy. And so we're seeing a lot of more weapon use than what we've seen previously, which is quite scary. This past month, we've actually had our highest level of detention bed usage. We are seeing quite a few more kiddos with mental health and more DD challenges, and we're DHS involved. And so we're working very closely with our partners on quite a few of those, but it's concerning some of, and we've talked about this before, some of the impacts of COVID that have potentially had on some of our kiddos with socialization and performance in school. So we're running into some of those challenges, and we're busy, very busy, more so than what we have been even pre-COVID. So
Hearing that from teachers and administrators too. Challenging.
yeah. So, and our juvenile staff, we're fully staffed. They're great. They are very responsive. They do a wonderful job. I absolutely adore all of them. And they are just working their tail off, and they work very well together. They work very well with the schools. And so they're really making those kiddos a priority and really trying to support them as best they can. So, and then the very back is our adult probation. I gave you just kind of this graph as a visual. This is for funded cases only, so this is not our entire population. However, this is a good reflection of what our population has done since COVID, which is plummet. So, and of course, this does have the impact of Measure 110 as well, in the decriminalization of the possession charges. But we are facing, again, residual impact of COVID legislative changes with the reduction of population on supervision overall statewide. As I mentioned previously, we're down 26%. As you know, our funding relies on our population that we serve. So we are looking at a substantial reduction in our state funding around supervision. We actually got good news, which is still not great news, but we got good news. Originally, we were looking at a $50 million deficit statewide. We did receive our snapshot, and it actually came out better than what was the first snapshot was. And so it's now at 22 million deficit, which is better than 50, but it's not great. So for us, that would equate to about a 500 to 600,000 reduction in our state funding over the biennium for the department. So that's quite impactful for as small as we are. So definitely, like statewide, we're looking at some strategies around that, but the election will really kind of drive our advocacy moving forward once all of that is settled and the new senators, representatives are in place, because we obviously have quite a few new folks coming in. So there's a lot of just, introductions and education around what it is we do and how we're funded and that, because it's not very straightforward. It's very statute based. And so
Saying about 2/3 are not funded?
yes.
Funded?
So
what determines that? Is it the level of crime or?
yes, level of crime. And so felonies are funded, and then they're actually PCS misdemeanors are still funded until those are closed out. We did have them on supervision prior. So we have 7 of those cases remaining when, like I said previously, we had 80 or 90. So we have 7 remaining of those. And then through Senate Bill 497 that passed last session, assault for and menacing constituting domestic violence, it has to have that language. That is a funded case. And then sex abuse 3 is funded case as well. And currently we only have 16 of those. So it takes some time, obviously, for, like we talked about, for those to get filed and get through the system. And then of course the language has to be on the court order in order for it to qualify as funding. All the other cases that we have are supported by the county that are not funded through the state.
Is that a point of advocacy for your organization to increase the scope of funded versus unfunded? So it still requires a lot of FTE and Resources.
It does require FTE, and I think that really we are one of few counties that supervise whatever is put on supervision. So those unfunded misdemeanors, we are one of a few.
Yep.
So those actually include DUIs. So a lot of counties don't supervise DUIs, and that is a huge public safety issue. So I believe from a county standpoint is that, you know, individuals need to be supervised so that we can assure they're receiving the treatment, they're abiding by their court order, we can provide cognitive interventions, skill building, we can help them take a pro-social step and hopefully not return. Our recidivism has done fairly well. Over our 3-year recidivism is at 38%. And I believe the state is at 50 as far as rearrest. Now, the recidivism cannot be put 100% on probation. There's a lot of other factors around that. However, that is a measure that the state puts on probation, even though it's not just ours. So yeah. So, I mean, funding wise, I think that, you know, folks in our community, if they commit a crime, I believe that they should have supervision so that we can try and assist them in not returning. But ultimately it's personal choice, of course. But I think that for public safety and preferences is if you are convicted and we would like to see what we can do to help you and intervene so that, you know, it's better for the community and it's better for you.
And that recidivism rate is stellar.
It's
Point of pride.
pretty good. And so our focus really is, the state's focus for adult is that we have assessments and case plans that we do. We have to work with them, skill building, homework. We do a variety of, our job has moved more towards the social work aspect and in some aspects treatment, but it's more on that cognitive level of skill building and really kind of thinking through your actions and decisions and consequences and understanding that process. A lot of our folks are just very reactive. And so there's not that, we take a second, or at least I do take a second. It's like, okay, what's the consequence if I say that or if I do that? A lot of our folks just don't, they just react. And so helping them really take that breath has made a huge impact on some of our folks. So, and it's wonderful to see. So yeah. Any other?
So I'm confused by this chart. And I want to get clarification on it because I'm going to ask that all of these graphs and charts be included in your presentation. I wish they'd actually have been live, but I think it's important for the public to be able to see what you're referring to. This particular chart, you're saying that this graph below is only funded cases through 11/1 of 21. And I'm confused by the chart statement at the top says total county population by dates and location. So is this chart only funded cases?
It is only funded cases. So this chart was pulled from Department of Corrections and they only track funded cases.
And so that means if I were to carry this chart out to today or through this month, this trend line continues to go down.
Yes.
Through the year, down to 290.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
And they haven't updated.
It's
their
a more
chart.
grim picture.
Yes. And it is more of a grim picture. Yes, it is. But I wanted to really be sure that you guys had that visual of that decrease because it is quite impactful and it is continuing to decrease. And again, there's a multitude of factors involved in that. And so with legislative changes, both with Measure 110 earned discharge, like we've chatted about before, is also an impact. We do receive limited funding for those that we close to earn discharge, but still that's not the same as having the body as far as funding goes. But obviously if they're eligible for it and they've made those strides, then they've earned it. But it does continue to decrease. Staffing issues with a variety of our partners comes into play with that as well. sentencing changes, whatever the case may be. I mean, there's a variety of factors that come into play with this, but I think it starts with COVID. So, and then Measure 110.
Yeah, but all of these things have an impact on what any judge is going to look at for accountability in probation as well. And they don't have the vitality for it isn't here in these numbers. And so my concern is how do we lean in to reinforcing the funding and making this tool in our community much more robust? Because this trend line is, I mean, again, if I'm sitting at the bench and I look at these numbers and say, well, that's not a good tool. So that's not something that, a judge could depend on at this point, I'm guessing, based on this trend. And so I'm looking for how do we assure that we're going to get it turned, make certain that the tool is there, that it works, it's accountable, et cetera.
Right. And I think that, and we're kind of at an impasse with our funding in comparison to our numbers, because quite frankly, our standards that we are required to abide by administrative rule really focuses us on our assessment and case planning and our measurable, impactful interactions with our clients, which is the skill building and the cognitive restructuring type interaction, us getting out in the community with them, us really engaging them more appropriately in the office. Our numbers have decreased to the point where we are able to really focus in on that proactive interventions with our clients than with the reactive piece. Our funding does not meet our requirements with supervision. It never has. There's legislative cost studies that we have to do every few years in order to identify what it actually costs us to do our job, but yet we're not funded adequately at the legislature. It's always below that. And there's no mandate that they have to actually fund us at that cost study. There's only that mandate they can't go below baseline, which is that snapshot funding amount. They can go below, but then that gives the counties the right to opt out and return to the state. But I think that there's additional conversations that need to be had about adequate funding and the services that we are mandated to do, and having the ability to have smaller caseloads so that we can actually interact with our folks. As previously, we were working with 70 to 80 on a caseload, medium and high risk. So now our average is about 50, which is still a little too high. I'd like to see us more in the 35 to 40 range, because we can adequately target those high risk individuals. We have more ability to get out and interact with them more on a measurable level, which is positive pro-social interaction. And so there's a back and forth in regards to, are we doing our job? Yes, we're working our tail off to do our job and to try and do it and meet our standards through administrative rule. Are we funded enough to do that? I don't believe that we are. I never have believed that we are. I believe that we have been put in a position to be reactive, which is not in the best interest of the community, not in the best interest of the client, and is not something that's going to be sustainable. So we have tried really hard to make adjustments in how I'm supervising folks based off of caseload sizes. Obviously, we are still down 2 positions. I have 1 in background, I have 1 in training. So there's 2 caseloads down. And then we still have this higher level of medium high risk individuals, and that's medium high risk to recidivate. So we need to focus on those key criminogenic factors of social interactions, employment, housing, livability issues. We can't do that if we don't have the adequate amount of time and funding to do that. We're also being looked at to provide more resources to them, which is housing and paying for treatment. We don't have the funding for that. So we're having to really prioritize as best we can. And unfortunately, we can't help everybody. And it's really disheartening, because we want to. Not that we have an open checkbook and, nobody wants to really do that, but we're struggling with engagement and we're struggling with funding, and obviously we're struggling with numbers, but the smaller caseloads we have, the better job we can do. But on the flip side, how our funding stream is identified, the smaller numbers we have, the smaller amount of funding we get. And so there's a different argument that needs to be had at the state level with our association in order to try and change that, because our funding is statute based. So I think I went in like a huge circle, very passionate about that piece. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess the other thing I get to is, again, if this chart were to be continued out to October 2022, again, you're indicating 485 cases currently against 290 funded. So what happens with those folks in the Delta?
I'm sorry.
What happens with those folks that are in the Delta and that 195 unfunded cases? What's the status of those individuals and the status of the program for those unfunded cases?
So the county supplements the unfunded cases. So we do get county funding to support those that are not funded by the state. We treat them the exact same way that we treat our funded cases. We do not do anything differently with them. We don't treat them any differently. We supervise them in the same manner, all based off of their risk assessment case plan and, you know, their need. And so basically, I mean, this unfunded piece, again, we're one of few counties that actually supervise the unfunded cases. Because the county supplements that. If the county chooses not to supplement that, then those cases would not be supervised. We would have a reduction in staff, reduction in services if we rely solely on state funding, which, as I mentioned, is quite inadequate for our requirements.
Where do you believe that funding comes from?
Funding, I'm sorry,
Where do you believe that county funding comes from?
our county funding,
Yes.
I believe it comes from our general fund,
Which is supplemented by
the community.
public safety
And
levy.
we get a portion of that,
Right.
yes.
So that's, I think one of the things I'm driving to is
Oh,
that
I'm sorry.
if we were to take that public safety levy element out of our
Yes.
revenue stream, that probably would be the first target.
It absolutely would. I believe that it would. That would probably be
So do I.
the more appropriate choice of that, to have deputies on the street providing more immediate public safety service. Yes. So, I mean, I think overall the public safety levy could have a huge impact overall on our system locally, because we would have to be making some really hard decisions as to, are we going to continue to supervise cases that are not misdemeanor cases in the community, or are we going to have a deputy on the road, or are we going to have a jail?
Thanks for
That's
bringing the
open.
nexus together for me there.
Thank you. I'm focused on my world right now. Yes.
Focus on trying to make sure we fund your world
Yes.
appropriately.
Yes. Well, and I think that we are all on the same team. We just have different roles on that team as far as the criminal justice system as a whole. So in that public safety levy really reaches out to all of us, regardless of whether or not we're specifically mentioned in it. But you know, the community supervision piece of these folks who are convicted of felony and misdemeanor crimes in the community, I'd say we work really hard on these high risk, medium high risk misdemeanor folks, because they are those that have more of the challenges with livability issues, mental health challenges, and having us there to help them and guide them into those services. We work very closely with mental health, just to make sure that's on record as well. I do have them in our office because the mental health aspect is actually increasing dramatically, and we are not mental health professionals, and we are not professionals in the developmentally disabled world, but we are finding more and more of those, and so we're bringing those professionals in to help us as a team. And it's an ongoing challenge. And our ultimate goal is public safety of victims and of our individual that we have on supervision, because we're having some challenges with maintaining their safety as well. So, so that would, eliminating that piece could have additional impacts on the community. And it does have a direct correlation to the public safety levy and the importance of that. Absolutely.
I think we just have to continue to put pressure on the state to fund your program's a $22 million deficit is what you're forgetting.
That's what we're looking at right now, our
Polk County overall, but that-
overall statewide.
it's scary. And you're really at the nexus of so many service delivery. It's almost like intensive case management, social work, that what you're doing.
It is, that's what
Yeah.
it's turned out to be.
You're building the relationships with these folks, and the state is investing quite a bit in behavioral health, and that's wonderful. But we can't ignore this piece because it's a critical piece for public safety. And you have the numbers to prove how valuable it is with this recidivism rate. So
Yes,
happy to help advocate for that.
thank you.
Anything else? Team? Thank you, Jody.
All right, thank you.
Do we have any non-listed items we need to discuss?
I do have an unlisted item we'd like to
Rockin'.
discuss. So Commissioner Pope and I were able to talk yesterday a little bit. He asked that I come in and update the board on the paid Oregon leave
Oh, yeah.
that is coming up. So essentially what this is it's Oregon family leave that will now be paid. In order to pay for that, starting in January, there will be a tax that will be levied on employees and employers, which is equivalent of 1% of the employee's salary. The employee pays 60% of that 1%, and the employer pays 40% of that 1%. That begins, like I said, in January of 2023. However, the program cannot be used until September of 2023. So from January, they're essentially building the funds that they assume will help cover this program. But that will really remain to be seen. There is an opt-out, but only if you provide an equivalent program personally. So the county can buy into a program. In fact, I have a meeting here in a few minutes to receive a quote on what that would be. I've received the quote so far. I think we have to be very careful with that. And I've received some input from other counties because I think that what they're able to do is show you this really good savings only in year one. Because the program itself, when it's funded privately, actually does cost more. But right now, January, you're only required to start if you have an equivalent program, which we have to provide them by November 15th, I believe it is. From January to September, only the employee pays their portion. The employer does not, because we start in September to pay our own plan. So you have this big savings from January through September, but then starting September, it can cost more, which means next year, you don't have a savings anymore. You actually cost more. So I don't want to be short-sighted on this whatsoever. So I will listen to what they have and see if there's something else in there that we're missing. So essentially, it does expand the Oregon Family Leave Act and who it will cover. So under what we refer to as OFLA, it covers employees that have been here for 6 months, working at least 20 hours a week. That goes away. They have to be here 90 days in order to qualify for the paid leave Oregon. It can be used for all of the same reasons and all of the same people under OFLA, except there's an expansion upon who's a family member, which we still don't have exact understanding of how it'll work. But essentially it says, or anyone you consider to be a family member, which is significantly different than what we have now. So that's the quick rundown. Essentially, if an employee, just to keep round figures here, if an employee makes $5,000 a month, then the tax that is hit is $50. That employee pays 30 of it, the county would pay 20 of it. Make sure I cover everything here. We will have to update our FMLA OFLA policy here because another caveat of this is that, so it runs through the employment department. The county doesn't actually administer it. So it goes to the employment department. They approve for an employee to be on the paid leave. From that point, they handle it. They will be paying them as if it was an unemployment claim, which most of our employees here will not get 100% of their wages. They'll get a percentage of their wage. They can then use their leave to make up the remainder to get to 100% of their wage, which isn't a whole lot different than like workers' compensation insurance and things like that. However, our policy right now states that an employee cannot go into leave without pay status unless they've burnt all of their leave. The only exception is we do allow an employee on FMLA OFLA to carry over 40 hours of vacation to bank it so that they can go into leave. When they come back, they have 40 hours still there. Under the new paid leave Oregon, you can't do that anymore. They do not have to use their leave. So they can get paid whatever they get from the state of Oregon, not use any of their leave. So they still wouldn't be making probably as much. But then when they come back from that leave, be exactly where they were when they came back.
I assume our leave accrual formula wouldn't change.
It would not change. Under our current policy, it would not change. Yes. We're still, and this was put in, man, it's been 3 years ago now, and has been pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. But now here we are dealing with it. It's funny to sit in on some of the trainings because there's mostly questions and things that come up and they say, oh yeah, we'll have to get back to you on that. So I'm curious to see how it will really work. The big concern I have is to make sure that we know they're supposed to be notifying us, but that we know in payroll what an employee has been paid through this program, so that we know what needs to be used to make up 100%. So what they cannot do is get paid through the program and then use their leave banks to make up 100% here. And so now they're making 166% of their wages. That cannot happen, but they're going to have to make sure they're keeping us informed. That's a quick rundown. It's a lot.
To see how the state does it. This is gonna be so much fun.
So we have sent out an email notifying everyone at the county, all employees, that it's coming. We received back a couple of questions at most. I just received a poster that we're going to have to also send out to all employees and put up in all of our buildings, which we're used to doing stuff like that. That's not a problem. But
Are the final rules out and they're just sort of trying to
mhm.
fill in the gaps as they go? Or are we to anticipate final rules to be out?
No, they're done.
And so no one's eligible for paid leave till after September.
Correct.
But they can still use their 12 weeks, right? It's 12 weeks.
Correct. Yes.
Of unpaid leave from January to September.
Yes. Yeah.
And come September, are they requalified for another 12 weeks under paid leave?
No, they do not. Essentially, it's still 12 weeks on a rolling calendar year, which we are not changing. There's some counties, businesses, municipalities that do a calendar year. They're going to have to change the way they do business because it's now a rolling calendar year. So some did set it up to where an employee could qualify for 12 weeks in a calendar year because you were able to do that under the law, and then 12 weeks the next calendar year. But that we never have had it that way. It's always been the rolling calendar year, which benefits definitely us right now because
So
that's
they take 12 weeks today. They're not eligible for another 12 weeks until a year.
till a year from now. Yeah. There are some caveats to that I probably won't get too far into, but yeah, for childbirth, there are some changes to that just for a whole lot of things where you can end up with more than 12 weeks. But
And for the record, employers must be 25 or more employees to make.
Correct.
In this, right?
Yeah, to be completely honest, I haven't worried too much about that because I
I
knew
know we don't, but I
qualified.
do as an
Yes.
elected official
Yeah,
for the business community. So I want to make certain that that's on the record while we're talking about this. People that are listening,
yes, correct.
they should go do some research on this if they haven't been notified yet or aren't aware, but
Yeah, absolutely.
The eligibility to enter into FLA doesn't change except for who is defined as a family member. And obviously the pay part.
Generally speaking, who is defined as a family member and your length of
Oh,
employment.
that's right.
Yeah, those are the two major
Does
changes.
that parallel FMLA requirements pretty closely?
No, FMLA has, how do I put this? So the federal government will put out a law and the state of Oregon will put out one that makes sure it's more lenient
generous.
than the federal one. So under FMLA, OFLA, you have to be employed for 12 months
Okay.
and you have to have been essentially working an average of half time during that 12 months before you qualify. And family members defined differently. It's not as broad.
hopefully will rule.
Hopefully will rule. We're in the state of Oregon. There's no way to get around it. Just like FMLA didn't create COVID leave or COVID leave at the time, but OFLA did, which is what changed, which I think is what they're trying to mirror some of the requirements off of as far as time of service. If you're here 90 days, you qualify. They aren't saying that it's changing OFLA, but it effectively changes OFLA. There's no way around that.
I suppose Mr. Hanson will let us know the budget impacts of that 40% contribution overall.
Yeah, that would be something you'll need to notify us of.
Thanks so much.
Welcome.
Any other non-listed items? In that case, we'll